Why was she the only one awake when the ship itself seemed to breathe in silence? Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chun had been staring at the reactor readouts so long that the fluorescent light above her had burned a permanent ache into her eyes. Coffee sat cold beside her elbow, untouched for hours, forgotten as numbers flickered across the screens like whispers she couldn't quite decode. It was 0347 hours in the South China Sea, and the USS Gerald R. Ford cut black water under a moonless sky. Thousands of sailors slept above her. The carrier's twin nuclear reactors worked tirelessly, splitting atoms, turning chaos into power, feeding a floating city that never stopped moving. But Sarah couldn't sleep. Not tonight. Not with what she'd seen. The data was small, tiny fluctuations, barely perceptible shifts in neutron flux that might have looked random to anyone else, but not to her. In 12 years of living inside the bones of reactors, monitoring them, studying their moods like they were living things, she had never seen a pattern like this, a faint sine wave hidden under noise. Every 47 minutes, precise, deliberate. Natural fluctuations were messy. This wasn't messy. This was engineered. She leaned closer to the screen, her pulse quickening. Whoever had done this hadn't left fingerprints, but they had left intent. The signature wasn't just data. It was a beacon, a quiet call, broadcasting the carrier's exact position and status to anyone who knew how to listen. Her throat tightened, a betrayal written in numbers. Her hand hovered over the secure phone. Call the officer of the deck, reported. Let someone higher decide what it meant. Her instincts screamed yes. Her training whispered caution. But before she could choose, the hatch banged open like a gunshot. 3 men in tactical gear filled the doorway, weapons drawn but angled just short of her chest. The silence of the reactor compartment broke into sharp echoes against steel walls. Behind them, Master Chief Williams stepped in, face carved from stone. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying no trace of question. "Step away from the console." Her body obeyed before her mind caught up. Slowly, carefully, she lifted her hands from the keyboard. "Master Chief, what's going on?" You need to come with us right now." Something in his tone told her there was no space for questions, only obedience. Nuclear protocol demanded instant compliance with security orders. But she wasn't just an officer. She was also a woman who had just found a message hidden inside her ship's beating heart. Her fingers darted one last time across the keys, quick, almost invisible, saving her analysis into an encrypted partition on the ship's network. If she disappeared, the evidence wouldn't. They marched her through narrow corridors, past the sleeping breath of sailors in berthing compartments, past workshops locked in shadow, past ladders that felt steeper with every rung. Footsteps echoed off bulkheads, heavy and final. Sarah tried to shape the chaos in her head into meaning. Had she stumbled onto something classified? Was this some twisted drill? But the faces of the guards gave her the answer before her mind could. These weren't drill faces. These were men acting like the ship itself was bleeding. The night air on the flight deck hit her lungs like a wave, hot, humid, alive with the roar of a helicopter already spinning its blades. The massive island of the carrier loomed behind her, radar arrays sweeping endless arcs against the stars. Out at sea, faint lights from destroyers and cruisers carved a protective circle around the carrier. Captain Reynolds stood near the waiting aircraft. His uniform looked as though it carried more weight than his body could bear. His face years older than the man she knew, even over the thumping rotors. His voice reached her clear and unshakable. "Sarah, I'm sorry. Orders from above, way above." She froze as he pressed a sealed envelope into her hand. "What orders?" "Captain, listen. I need to report something about the reactor systems." "No." His word cut like a blade. His eyes held regret, but his tone left no oxygen for protest. "Whatever you think you found, forget it. That's an order." The crew chief at her elbow shouted over the roar. "Ma'am, we need to go now." They pulled her toward the helicopter, and that's when she saw it. A faint white line, 2 miles off the starboard side. Just a ripple, barely visible against the black. The wake of a periscope carving through the sea, moving dark, silent, unannounced. No. Running lights, no identification beacon, no radio call. Her blood froze. She turned to point, but the crew chief shoved her inside. The rotors screamed louder. The ship below her shrank. Then the dark ocean consumed everything. She pressed her face to the window as the carrier fell away. Her eyes locked on the water where the periscope had been until the ripple vanished. Swallowed by silence, she knew what she'd seen. She knew it wasn't random. The pattern in the reactor, the beacon hidden in the noise, the submarine running silent and close. Threads were pulling tight around her, invisible hands shaping a story she hadn't been invited to tell. 18 hours later, the helicopter landed hard at Naval Station Norfolk. The Virginia sun burned her eyes as she stumbled out, legs weak from the long, sleepless flight. The sealed envelope still weighed in her pocket like something she wasn't supposed to open. A black sedan idled nearby. 2 men waited, suits sharp, sunglasses masking their eyes despite the overcast sky. They didn't belong here, not to the Navy, not to the life she knew. Lieutenant Commander Chun, the taller one, stepped forward, accent touched by the South. "I'm Agent Morrison. This is Agent Webb. You'll come with us." Her grip tightened on her sea bag. "I need to report to my commanding officer. I have critical information about reactor anomalies." "Your commanding officer," Webb interrupted, his voice smooth as glass, "is us as of 30 minutes ago." He held up a tablet. Orders bore the seal of the Chief of Naval Operations. Her name, her transfer, her silence, her body moved before her mind agreed. She slid into the sedan, the smell of leather and stale coffee pressing close. Norfolk landmarks blurred past tinted glass, familiar streets warping into unfamiliar turns instead of the base. They veered down a side road to a building without insignia, faceless behind. Fences and cameras, the lobby was sterile. White walls, cheap furniture, no flags, no anchors, no signs of home. The elevator took her to the 4th floor. No windows. A conference room where 3 men in suits stared at glowing laptops. The one at the head of the table, older, silver hair, blue eyes sharp enough to dissect her. Lieutenant Commander Chun. "Please, sit." Her body stayed standing. "Sir, with respect, I need identification, and I need to report a critical security, Project Deep Strike," the man said, cutting her open with 3 words. Her breath caught. He slid a folder across the polished table. Her fingers shook as she opened it. Pages of reactor schematics, submarine propulsion designs, advanced nuclear engineering concepts she had written years ago, thesis calculations, classified models, all twisted, weaponized. Every page carried her digital signature, her codes, her name. Her voice cracked. "I've never seen these before in my life." But her own work stared back at her. Equations she'd drawn at 3 in the morning during her doctorate. Designs she'd tested in classified projects. Taken, stolen, used. The man leaned back, his voice smooth. "The metadata says otherwise. Created on your workstation. Biometric scans, security logs, all authenticated by you. It was a perfect frame. Too perfect. What do you want from me?" Her voice was barely more than a whisper. "Your cooperation." His smile never touched his eyes. "The submarine running your modifications has encountered complications, reactor instability, communications failure. Chinese naval vessels surrounding it as we speak. If you don't help us, 127 sailors will die, and the world will believe you killed them." Her heart stuttered. The sine wave pattern in the Gerald Ford's reactor. The periscope cutting water. This was no drill. This was a trap. The man slid another photo across the table. A little brother David, 22, backpack slung over his shoulder, walking across the Virginia Tech campus. Her stomach dropped. bright young man. The man said softly, "Engineering major, like his sister." It would be tragic if something interrupted his studies. Sarah's fists clenched against the table. Her brother, her work, her silence, all held hostage. The room hummed with the quiet of air conditioning, and she understood with crystalline clarity. They had built a cage so tight she could hardly breathe. But they needed her alive. They needed her expertise. And in that narrow space, buried under fear, she found her only leverage. She swallowed hard. What exactly do you need me to do? How could she fight an enemy she couldn't see? The folder sat in front of her like a bomb, its pages filled with lies dressed in her own handwriting. Schematics she had never approved, models she had never finished, signatures she had never signed. Yet somehow every line pointed back to her, a perfect crime, drawn with her fingerprints. The man at the head of the table, Director Hawthorne, he finally introduced himself, watched her with calm calculation. His two associates, Kellerman and Price, sat silent, their laptops glowing with data she wasn't allowed to see. They didn't look like Navy. They didn't look like government. They looked like men who didn't need uniforms because power itself had clothed them. "Lieutenant Commander," Hawthorne said, as if the title still belonged to her. "The situation in the Taiwan Strait is deteriorating quickly. The USS Connecticut surfaced 12 hours ago in Chinese territorial waters. Its reactor is unstable. Navigation systems failed. Communication blackout. The Chinese are circling like sharks." He tapped a remote. The wall screen flickered to life with satellite imagery. A grainy outline of a Virginia-class submarine bobbed amid a ring of Chinese destroyers. Their missile arrays gleamed even in the satellite light, weapons hot and waiting. Sarah leaned forward despite herself, studying the thermal overlay. The readings were wrong. Reactor output spiking and crashing. Containment systems straining under heat that would break them within hours. She recognized the pattern instantly. It was her theoretical model, but butchered, stripped of safeguards, forced into reality without restraint. She whispered, almost to herself, "It's a cascade failure. They used my research like it was a blueprint. They didn't build in the safety buffers. That reactor is eating itself alive." "Which," Kellerman finally said, voice flat, "is why we need your cooperation. You'll provide the expertise to stabilize the Connecticut remotely." Her eyes snapped to him. "And if I refuse?" Price leaned forward, his smile cold. He slid another photograph across the table. David again, this time not on a campus sidewalk, this time sitting at an outdoor cafe, a book in his hand, sunlight on his face, and in the edge of the frame, blurred but clear enough to know a man watching him. Price's tone was casual, conversational. "Your brother's a bright kid. Would be a shame if brilliance never had its chance to bloom." Sarah's chest tightened until she couldn't breathe. For a moment, silence claimed the room. The hum of air conditioning, the buzz of electricity in the walls. She forced herself to inhale, to exhale, to find some fragment of control inside a game already rigged against her. They had stolen her work. They blamed her for it. They had tied her brother's life to their conspiracy. But they had also made one mistake. They needed her alive. Her voice, when it came, was quiet but steady. "What exactly do you need me to do?" Hawthorne's smile barely lifted. "That's better." Hours blurred together after that. They moved her to a secure facility outside Norfolk, a place that didn't exist on any directory she'd ever seen. The windows were false. The doors required codes she'd never been given. Every hallway smelled of bleach and silence. Her new world was a bank of screens, each streaming real-time data from the USS Connecticut, reactor core temperatures, coolant pressures, neutron flux patterns that made her stomach knot. The numbers told a story of death counting down in degrees Celsius at 2,147 hours. She finally said it aloud. 18 hours, maybe less. After that, containment failure becomes inevitable. Hawthorne stood behind her, sipping coffee that smelled too rich, too normal. His voice was calm. Then we resolve it within 18 hours. Sarah didn't look away from the screens. That's assuming the Chinese don't act first. They're not going to sit there while an American submarine leaks radiation into their waters. On another monitor, a news feed ran live footage. Chinese destroyers circling closer, Taiwanese patrol boats hovering, reporters whispering words. Like nuclear terrorism, she shook her head. They think we're testing a first-strike weapon, a submarine that can vanish underwater forever, living in their backyard from their perspective. This isn't malfunction, it's invasion. Kellerman's voice cut in from across the room. Our diplomatic channels are working overtime. Diplomacy won't matter, Sarah said sharply. All it takes is one nervous officer, one torpedo fired, and then 127 Americans die. Along with the truth. The word tasted bitter, because she still didn't know the whole of it. She only knew the fragments, the beacon and the Gerald Ford's reactor, the periscope wake, the files forged in her name. But the whole picture stayed in shadows, just out of reach. Then her workstation chimed. An incoming message, routed through emergency naval telemetry. Unauthorized, unfiltered. Her breath caught as she read the sender. CPO Marcus Rodriguez, USS Connecticut. Marcus, one of her brightest former students, the kid who devoured her. Lectures at nuclear power school, who'd asked questions even she had to think about before answering. If anyone aboard that dying submarine could still fight, it was him. The message blinked on her screen. Commander Chun, don't know if this will reach you. Reactor modifications failing exactly like your models predicted. Whoever built this ignored safety protocols. We're facing cascade failure. Chinese won't let us surface. Need your help. Crew already showing radiation sickness. We're running out of time. Rodriguez, her throat tightened. He still trusted her, even trapped, even dying. He reached for her. Her fingers hovered over the keys. She risked everything by responding, but silence would kill them. She typed fast, heart pounding. Marcus being held by people who stole my work. They need me to fix their mess remotely. Secure comms possible? I need damage assessment before shutdown procedures. His reply came minutes later. Lunt, urgent. No secure comms, Chinese jamming. But I can give you real-time reactor data through emergency telemetry. Situation deteriorating fast. Some crew showing signs of radiation poisoning. We need a miracle. Her hand trembled on the keyboard. 127 lives. A crew she'd never met but carried in her heart anyway. Marcus's voice in her head. David's face in a photograph, and the invisible hand of Hawthorne pressing down on her every choice. She closed her eyes, and for one moment, let the weight of it press her into silence. Then she opened them again. Her voice steadied. I'll need full access to the Navy's emergency command network, and a direct line to the Connecticut's control room. You want me to save your submarine? That's how it has to be. Hawthorne studied her. For the first time, his eyes betrayed something that might have been doubt or respect. He nodded once. The screens around her glowed brighter as new data flooded in. The countdown toward catastrophe ticked on, relentless. But Sarah Chun, for the first time since this nightmare began, felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel. Resolve. She would save the crew. She would protect her brother. And somehow, in the cracks between those two impossible promises, she would find the truth. Because truth had been stolen from her, twisted against her, weaponized in her name. But truth had a way of fighting back, and she was done being silent. What happens when the person you trust most suddenly sounds like a stranger? The emergency command network came alive at 0223 hours. Voices from 3 continents collided in her headset. Analysts in Norfolk, admirals pacing in Washington, engineers whispering from deep under the sea. The room itself became a storm of sound, and in the middle of it sat Sarah Chun, eyes locked on glowing data streams, trying to keep her breathing steady. On her primary screen, She saw them sailors in radiation suits inside the Connecticut's reactor compartment. They moved like shadows under the red emergency lights, sweat streaming inside their helmets as they worked against a death clock no one could stop. Commander Chun, a voice cut through the static, female, hard-edged. This is Admiral Patricia Hayes, Subland. I'm told you designed the modifications that are currently killing my submarine. Sarah's jaw tightened, her fingers never stopped moving, scrolling through telemetry, cross-checking numbers against the models she'd once written in safer days. Admiral, with respect, I designed theoretical improvements. Someone took my work and implemented it without safeguards. That's why your reactor's failing. Harmonic resonance in the core. A resonance it was never meant to handle. Through her headset, another voice came in. Tinny was static but achingly familiar. Commander, this is Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez. We've got steam leaks in the primary loop. Radiation levels climbing. Engineering may not be habitable much longer. Sarah's chest constricted. Marcus, the kid she'd once mentored, now the man trapped in a coffin at the bottom of the sea. She scanned the telemetry, and then her heart dropped. This wasn't just a meltdown, it was a message. The reactor data carried an extra layer, an unnatural rhythm woven into the numbers. She'd seen it before, a signature hidden in the Gerald Ford's reactor, and now here, inside the Connecticut, her voice was low, almost afraid of its own truth. Marcus, check the neutron flux monitoring system. Look for sensors that don't belong there. A pause, crackling silence. Then his voice returned, uncertain, affirmative. Extra array, wired into the core. Readouts are in some weird format. Never seen it before. She felt the blood drain from her face. It's not just monitoring, it's broadcasting. The Connecticut's reactor is acting like a beacon. Someone turned your submarine into a tracking device. Hawthorne, standing just behind her, stiffened. His carefully neutral mask cracked for the first time. That's impossible. Her voice sliced through the noise. I know my own work. This isn't propulsion testing. It's surveillance. They're broadcasting our most advanced subs like their prey. Before he could reply, a new voice broke in over the comms. Calm, steady, familiar enough to make Sarah's blood turn to ice. This is Captain James Morrison, commanding officer aboard USS Connecticut. I need to speak with whoever is leading this operation. She froze. That voice, that name. Jim. Her throat went dry. What the hell are you doing aboard the Connecticut? Silence, then. Hello, Sarah. I was hoping we could avoid involving you directly. Her mind raced Morrison, her mentor at the academy, the man who'd guided her through the Navy, who had vouched for her brilliance when others doubted her, the one who told her she belonged here, in the nuclear heart of the fleet. You, she whispered, her words barely audible. You stole my research. A pause, and then his voice, quieter now, tinged with something raw. Sarah, listen to me. I never wanted this. They have Emma, my daughter. 3 months ago, men came to my house with photos of her, walking to class, eating lunch. They knew her life better than I did. They said if I cooperated, she'd be safe. Sarah's head spun. The conspiracy wasn't faceless anymore. It had a name she trusted, a name she loved, and that name was breaking in her ears. Who, Jim? She demanded. Who are they? Defense contractors, foreign services, I don't know their real faces, I only know they wanted submarine tech. Your research was the key. They forced my hand. The Connecticut was supposed to be a demonstration. Nothing more, just data collection. Then Emma would be free. On the display, reactor temperatures spiked another 5 degrees. Sarah's hands flew over her console, chasing numbers like a medic chasing a pulse. You turned one of our submarines into a Trojan horse, she hissed. And now 127 sailors are going to pay for it. His reply broke. It wasn't supposed to be this way. Something went wrong with the modifications. The resonance started destabilizing as soon as we hit depth. From below the sea, Marcus's voice tore through the static. "Commander, multiple system failures cascading. Containment failing fast." Sarah looked at the countdown. 1 hour, 12 minutes until the Chinese deadline. But in truth, they didn't have an hour. They didn't even have half that. The reactor was unraveling. Faster than the politicians could argue. She turned, locking eyes with Hawthorne across the command center. His hand twitched near his jacket. His silence screamed guilt. "I know who you're working for," she said. Her voice carried through the room, through the noise, through the fear. "And I know this isn't about propulsion. It's about compromise. It's about selling American submarines to the highest bidder." His hand froze, the weight of her words hung heavy, undeniable. But before anyone could react, alarms blared across the room. Analysts shouted over one another. On the main display, sonar contacts shifted. A Chinese submarine launched weapons onto the Connecticut. A voice cracked through the chaos. "Admiral Hayes again. Commander Chun, Admiral Jiang has issued an ultimatum. 1 hour, 7 minutes. Surrender, or they fire." Sarah stared at the display. The Chinese weren't bluffing, and if they fired, the Connecticut's reactor would go critical before the wreckage even hit the seabed. The Pacific would choke in radiation. The world would ignite. She leaned into her headset. "Admiral, the reactor crisis is only half of this. The Connecticut's been sabotaged by defense contractors and foreign services. It's broadcasting like a beacon. This is bigger than a meltdown. It's espionage." The room froze. Hayes' voice was ice. "Commander, you're exceeding your authority." "My authority?" Sarah snapped. "I swore an oath to defend this country against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and right now, the enemy is inside this room." Her hands flew across the keys, sending code down the emergency link. "Marcus, I'm transmitting. Shut down procedures. First step, cut the beacon, rip out the array, now." Static crackled. Then Rodriguez's voice. "Copy that. Disconnecting beacon system." Seconds stretched like hours. Then array disconnected, but oh God, reactor just spiked 15 degrees. Disconnection triggered some kind of failsafe. We're accelerating meltdown. Sarah's heart crashed in her chest. The beacon hadn't just monitored, it had controlled. Cutting it had convinced the system the world was ending. How long? She demanded. Rodriguez's reply was a knife. 20 minutes. Maybe less. 20 minutes, not an hour, not diplomacy, not debate. Admiral Hayes. Sarah shouted into the storm. "Contact Admiral Jiang directly. Tell him the reactor is an uncontrolled cascade. If we don't cooperate, the strait is lost. He needs to give us technical assistance now. The Chinese will never. They don't want radiation any more than we do. Politics doesn't matter anymore. Physics does." She turned to Hawthorne, his hand still hovering near his jacket. "Shoot me if you want, but if you do, you'll lose the only person who can save that submarine." For a moment, the room was still. Then his hand slipped away from his weapon. "All right," he said. His voice was barely more than a whisper. "What do you need?" Sarah's fingers blurred across her console, pulling together numbers, code, fragments of hope. She'd bought them 20 minutes. 20 minutes to stop catastrophe. 20 minutes to save 127 lives. But even as she worked, a deeper dread settled into her bones, because she knew now that saving the Connecticut was only the beginning. The real enemy wasn't the meltdown. It was the men who wanted it. What do you do when the clock itself becomes your enemy? The countdown timer on the main display ticked like a heartbeat, each second falling away into silence that felt louder than the alarms. 20 minutes until meltdown. 20 minutes until the Pacific became a graveyard. Sarah's voice cut through the noise. "Admiral Hayes, patch me through to the Chinese technical teams. They've faced resonance problems before. We need their expertise if we're going to stabilize the core." Murmurs rippled through the command center. Cooperation with Beijing, it was unthinkable. But unthinkable had drowned hours ago. Hayes hesitated. Sarah could hear the battle in the Admiral's silence, the old reflexes of loyalty, suspicion, pride fighting against the weight of inevitability. Finally, Hayes exhaled. Knew it. New voices flooded the line. Mandarin spoken rapid fire, translated almost in real time. A team of Chinese nuclear engineers joined the network. Their tone brisk, professional, stripped of politics. For one moment, the world's enemies were united by the same terror. The physics of a reactor spiraling toward oblivion. Sarah's console came alive with new data, graphs, numbers, unfamiliar. But familiar. The Chinese had fought this demon before, on reactors of their own design. And now their scars were being laid bare for her to read. She leaned forward, her voice steady. Marcus, listen carefully. I'm sending you modified shutdown procedures. They'll look strange Chinese protocols we've never used, but trust them. They're designed to handle resonance harmonics. Static. Then his reply, strained but resolute. Copy that, Commander. We'll make it work. On the big screen, the Connecticut's temperature graph flattened ever so slightly. A plateau. Instead of a climb, a gasp of hope, Sarah allowed herself one breath. Just one. But hope was fragile. Her secure terminal chimed, a message, encrypted, the sender untraceable. She almost didn't open it, but instinct, always instinct, forced her to look. Her blood turned to ice. Commander Chun, your brother David, has been moved. He remains unharmed for now. Continue your current course, and he lives. Fail to restore the beacon within 15 minutes, and he dies. Emma Morrison will also vanish permanently. You have one choice, one chance. Sarah's hands trembled. The message glared back at her like a loaded weapon pressed against her heart. She looked around the command center. Dozens of analysts, officers, engineers, all depending on her. None of them knew the impossible knife now pressed to her throat. She stared at the timer. 19 minutes to meltdown. 15 minutes to choose between her country and her family. Her lungs burned. The math had no clean solution. Marcus, she said, forcing steel into her voice. Prepare to reconnect the beacon system. Confusion burst in his reply. Reconnect? Commander, you just told us procedures won't hold without the array. It was designed into the control logic. Reconnect, or we lose containment. It was a lie. A deliberate, surgical lie. But she said it with the calm of a surgeon giving orders in an operating theater. Beside her, Hawthorne's eyes narrowed. He knew. He knew exactly what she was doing, why she was bending, but he said nothing. He only watched. On the feed, Rodriguez shouted orders to his team. Sparks flew as sailors reattached cables, reconnected data ports. Seconds later, his voice came through. Beacon system restored, reactor temperature stabilizing. The room exhaled in relief. But Sarah was already moving, because while she had reactivated the beacon, she had also buried something inside it. A trace. A ghost hidden in the code. Every receiver that acknowledged the beacon now revealed itself. Its location, its purpose. Dots bloomed across her screen like stars across a night sky. A warehouse in Baltimore. A fishing trawler in the South China Sea. A comms hub in Vladivostok. And then her stomach twisted. A third-floor office inside. Naval Station Norfolk itself. Naval Intelligence Headquarters. Her heart hammered. The conspiracy wasn't outside the gates. It was inside, wearing her flag. Her uniform, her oaths. She turned to Hayes, her voice sharp. Admiral, I'm transmitting every location. FBI, CIA, Naval Intelligence. All of them need to hit these targets now. Hawthorne's voice cut low. Warning. You're signing death warrants. Good, Sarah snapped, not looking up. Starting with whoever thought they could threaten my family. Her trace finished, the map complete, an entire network of betrayal, drawn in glowing lines across 3 continents, and then, through the chaos, a voice she had never heard before reached her ear, calm, professional. Commander Chun, this is Agent Martinez, FBI. We have your brother David. He's alive, unharmed, and in protective custody. Anna Morrison, too. Both are safe. Her knees almost buckled. For one instant, the weight lifted, replaced by a flood of relief so sharp it hurt. She barely had time to breathe it in, because Rodriguez's voice came next. Urgent, cutting, raw, Commander, emergency shutdown procedures initiated. Temperatures dropping, containment holding. We might actually survive this. The room erupted, shouts of relief, disbelief, laughter that sounded more like sobs. Admiral Hayes' voice carried over the network. Chinese submarine Chang'an 11 is standing down. Admiral Jiang has agreed to escort the Connecticut into international waters for emergency repairs. Sarah sagged into her chair, every muscle trembling. It was over. Against every lie, every betrayal, every impossible choice, they had done it. The sailors would live. The strait would remain whole. The world had stepped back from the edge. But as the command center settled, as voices shifted from panic to protocol, Sarah realized something. Her war wasn't over, because the conspiracy had been unmasked. Yes, the network exposed, its players hunted, but their shadows still lingered. The lies they had built with her name still clung like poison. And Hawthorne still stood behind her, watching, silent. "Commander Chun," he said at last. His voice was low, almost human. "You realize what you've done here will follow you. Your clearance, your career, maybe even your freedom. Every decision you made tonight will be dissected under a microscope." Sarah rose, her body exhausted but her voice firm. She turned to face him. "I know," she said, "but 127 sailors are alive. My brother is safe. And your network of traitors has been burned to the ground." She stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. "I can live with the consequences of doing the right thing, can you?" The silence that followed felt heavier than any alarm. How do you walk away from fire when the smoke follows you? 6 months later, Sarah sat in front of a row of senators, their faces half hidden behind stacks of classified binders and the dim glow of recessed lights. The room was closed, sealed. No cameras, no press, only silence and power. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and old secrets. Her voice was steady, but every word felt like carrying weight across a narrow bridge. She told them about the sine wave signature and the Gerald. Ford's Reactor. The periscope wake in the South China Sea. The security team that had pulled her from her station. She described the folder of falsified designs. The photographs of David. The faces of men who threatened family to control loyalty. She spoke of Project Deep Strike, of stolen research twisted into sabotage, of a beacon that betrayed American submarines to foreign powers. And she told them about the night she had lied. The night she had ordered Marcus Rodriguez to reconnect the beacon, gambling her brother's life against 127 sailors and the stability of the Pacific. Some senators leaned forward, frowning in concentration. Others reclined, hands folded, calculating. The weight of her words against the balance of politics. None of them interrupted. When she finished, the silence stretched. Finally, one senator, his hair thin and his voice gravel, asked the question that hung unspoken in every mind. "Lieutenant, Commander, why didn't you walk away? When you realized your name had been forged, your work stolen, why didn't you let the system handle it?" Sarah met his eyes, and for once, she didn't flinch. "Because the system was compromised," she said. "Because the people threatening. My family wore the same badges you trust. Because in that command center, there wasn't time to wait for the truth to catch up. There was only time to decide whether people lived or died." Her words hung there, unchallenged. The senator leaned back, eyes narrowing as though searching for something hidden in her face. Perhaps he found it. Perhaps he didn't. The hearing ended hours later with no applause, no verdict. Only the scraping of chairs and the low shuffle of staffers carrying classified binders back into the dark. When she stepped into the cold Washington night, the air felt cleaner, sharper, but also empty. She had testified. She had told the truth, but truth didn't erase scars. The fallout rippled across the Navy like shockwaves. Captain James Morrison, once her mentor, stood before a court-martial. His voice cracked when he explained how photographs of Emma had forced his hand, how fear for his daughter had driven him into complicity. The tribunal listened, unyielding. He was stripped of command, dishonor heavy on his shoulders. But when sentencing came, it was lighter than Sarah had expected. Reduced rank, confinement time, but not forever, because Morrison, broken though he was, had given something back. He had named names, contractors, handlers, naval officers who had traded loyalty for money and power. His testimony, combined with Sarah's trace from the beacon, tore a hole through the conspiracy. Agents were arrested in Baltimore warehouses. Foreign vessels were seized in the Pacific. Offices raided even within Norfolk itself. The network bled, exposed to daylight. But Sarah knew enough about power to recognize a darker truth. You never catch all of them. Shadows have a way of slipping into new corners. For Sarah, the days after the crisis blurred into weeks of silence. Her clearance suspended, her uniform packed away in a closet she barely opened. She walked the quiet streets of Annapolis at night, feeling like a ghost wearing civilian clothes, invisible in the town where midshipmen marched proudly in white and blue. Everywhere she went, people looked at her differently, some with gratitude, others with suspicion. She had saved the submarine, but she had also disobeyed, lied, stepped beyond her orders. To some, she was a hero. To others, a danger. David visited often, his face still carrying the shadow of what had almost happened. He tried to make jokes, tried to pull her back into the normal life of coffee shops and late-night movies. But sometimes she caught him watching her, eyes full of guilt, as if her near ruin had been his fault. She never told him otherwise, not fully. Some truths were too heavy to share, even with the ones you loved most. When the phone finally rang months later, the voice on the other end was clipped, official. Lieutenant Commander Chun, your clearance is restored. Your record has been amended, but your submarine service is over. She listened without answering. The words didn't sting as much as she thought they might. You're being reassigned, the voice continued. Naval Academy, instructor, nuclear engineering. Effective immediately. Her eyes drifted to the framed photograph on her desk, her and her academy classmates. Smiles frozen in a moment before any of them knew what the future would carve out of them. She had once been one of them, a dreamer in uniform. Now she would be the one standing in front of a classroom, telling younger dreamers about responsibility, about the razor edge between brilliance and destruction. She whispered only 2 words into the phone. I accept. The academy classroom smelled of chalk and ink, though most of the lessons were digital now. Rows of faces stared back at her, some alert, some tired, all full of the restless hunger of youth. She stood at the front, marker in hand. Equations scrawled behind her like battle plans, but it wasn't the math she wanted them to remember. It was the weight behind it. Every calculation you make, she told them. Every design, every equation, it's more than numbers. It's lives. You may never see the faces that depend on you, but they're there. And if you forget that, even once, someone else will remind you in ways you'll never forgive. Her students shifted uneasily. Some scribbled notes, others just stared, but she kept speaking, her tone steady, her eyes unblinking. You will face choices the textbooks don't prepare you for. Choices between silence and truth, between obedience and conscience, between family and duty. None of those equations balance cleanly. None of them ever will. But when the moment comes, remember this. Sometimes doing the right thing costs you everything, and you do it anyway. The room was silent, the kind of silence that meant they were listening, really listening. She capped the marker. For the first time in months, she felt almost whole. At night, in her office, she sometimes replayed the crisis in her head. The sound of Marcus's voice under pressure. The crack in Morrison's tone when he spoke of Emma. The phantom of David's face in a photograph he never knew was taken. She thought about the mathematics of sacrifice, how it had almost broken her, how it still haunted her. But she also thought about the sailors of the Connecticut, alive, breathing, writing letters home because she had refused to remain silent. The choices had scarred her, but they had also defined her. And as she leaned back in her chair, the shadows long on the walls, she found herself whispering words that had anchored her through the storm. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. What if the war doesn't end when the battle is over? Sarah thought teaching would be quiet. She thought it would be steady chalk on boards, equations explained, young faces bent over notebooks. She thought the ghost would finally give her peace. But the ghost came anyway. They came in the flicker of a projector light, in the hum of fluorescent bulbs that reminded her of reactor rooms, in the restless silence of students staring, waiting for her to deliver answers she no longer believed were simple. By day she drilled them on reactor dynamics, energy balances, safety protocols. By night she walked alone across the quiet Annapolis campus, the Severn River glinting under moonlight, her breath sharp in the cold air. She told herself she had survived. She told herself the story was over. But stories never end cleanly. One October afternoon, a cadet lingered after class. He was young, eager, the kind of student she used to be. Sharp questions, restless ambition. He hovered at her desk, shuffling papers. "Commander," he said, hesitating, "I came across something weird in the simulator logs." Her pen stilled. Weird how? He slid a printout across the desk. Numbers. Reactor telemetry from the Academy's training simulators. Buried in the noise was a faint pattern. A wave, familiar, haunting. Her throat went dry. Every 47 minutes. Precise. Deliberate. Her students had no idea what it meant. But she did. She had seen it in the Gerald Ford, in the Connecticut. In the eyes of men who thought they could sell loyalty to the highest bidder. The conspiracy was supposed to be burned, exposed, erased, but the signal had returned. She dismissed the cadet gently, her face calm, her voice steady. But the moment the door closed behind him, her hand shook. That night, she sat in her office long after the halls went dark, staring at the telemetry. The beacon signature pulsed back at her like a heartbeat, steady and patient. She remembered Hawthorne's cold blue eyes, his hand hovering near his jacket. She remembered the warehouse in Baltimore, the Cums hub in Vladivostok, the office inside Norfolk itself. They had raided them all, arrested names, seized files. The Senate had declared the network dismantled. But networks don't die that easily. They adapt, they hide. Someone had buried the beacon inside the Academy's training systems, where no one would ever think to look, where the next generation of officers would accept it as background noise, never knowing they were practicing on a system already compromised. Her stomach twisted. Whoever had survived the purge wasn't just alive. They were still inside. A week later, she found herself back in Washington, sitting across from Admiral Hayes in a private office. The Admiral listened silently as Sarah slid the simulator logs across the desk. Hayes' face didn't move. Not once. Finally, Hayes exhaled. "We pulled those codes months ago. We burned the network. If this is true, it means someone rebuilt it." Sarah's voice was low, sharp. Not rebuilt, embedded. They've hidden it inside training systems. They're teaching cadets to accept sabotage as normal. Hayes rubbed her temples. "We can't open another investigation. The last one nearly gutted Navy intelligence. The headlines alone?" Sarah leaned forward, her voice cutting. "Headlines don't melt reactors. Physics does. If they're embedding signals again, it's only a matter of time before another sub gets turned into a coffin." The silence stretched. Finally, Hayes spoke, softer now. You're not in the chain anymore, Sarah. You're an instructor. This isn't your fight." But Sarah knew the truth. She had been pulled into this war once by accident. Now she was being pulled back by choice, back in Annapolis. She found herself watching her students differently. She studied their faces when they worked the simulations, wondering which of them might notice the signature, wondering if any would recognize it for what it was. Most didn't. They treated the wave as noise, as background, just as the architects of Deep Strike wanted. But one afternoon, Marcus Rodriguez's voice returned to her through a grainy call. He had been reassigned after the Connecticut promoted. In fact, but the strain of that night still clung to him like salt water. "Commander," he said, using the title even now, "I heard whispers. Something about beacon signatures showing up again in the Pacific. Different subs, different waters, same pattern." Her chest tightened. "It's not whispers. I've seen it here, in the Academy systems," he cursed softly. "Then it's not over." "No," she said. "It never was." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Marcus asked the question that had haunted her since the night of the crisis. What if this fight doesn't end? What if it never ends? Sarah looked out her office window, the lights of Annapolis reflected in the black water of the river. "Then we don't stop fighting," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of conviction. "Even if all we can do is teach the next ones how to see what we see, even if we fight alone." That night, walking across the campus, she felt the old weight return. The hum of fluorescent lights, the silence of sealed rooms, the ghost of Reactor. Telemetry echoing in her mind, but this time, she didn't feel broken. She felt ready. The war hadn't ended with the Connecticut. It hadn't ended with her testimony, or Morrison's court-martial, or the arrests. It would never end, because the enemy wasn't a single submarine, or a single network, or a single man in a tailored suit. The enemy was hunger, greed, the quiet. Hands that reached for power in the shadows and didn't care who drowned for it. And if that enemy was eternal, then so was her resolve. The following week, she began her lecture with a question. "Why?" she asked her cadets. "Do you trust the data your systems give you?" Confusion rippled across the room. A few hands rose, offering textbook answers. Calibration, redundancy, protocols. She let them speak. She let them fall into the comfort of procedure. Then she shook her head. Protocols can be corrupted, systems can be rewritten, numbers can lie. The question isn't whether the data is clean. The question is whether you are awake enough to see when it isn't. The room fell silent. Some students shifted uncomfortably. Others leaned forward, curious, uneasy. Sarah let the silence stretch, because silence, she knew, had its own kind of power. That night, alone in her office, she opened the simulator logs again. The beacon wave pulsed at her like a challenge, steady and patient. She traced it with her finger across the page. 47 minutes. Again and again, somewhere out there, someone was listening. Somewhere out there, the game was still being played. But for the first time in months, she didn't feel afraid. She felt alive, because if the war was endless, then so was she. What happens when the ghosts decide to step back into the light? Sarah had convinced herself she could fight this war from the margins, from classrooms, from lectures, from lessons whispered to cadets about vigilance and conscience. She thought she could teach and warn in shape, while others carried the weight of action. The war doesn't wait for volunteers. It comes and takes you. The first sign arrived as a headline no one outside the Pentagon seemed to notice. Routine training exercise in the Philippine Sea interrupted by unexpected reactor anomalies, buried. In the article was a single sentence that made Sarah's stomach twist. Fluctuations in energy output, repeated at 47-minute intervals. She stared at the words until the letters blurred. The beacon, again. Hours later, Marcus called. His voice was rough, tired, but steady. "It's spreading, Commander. Not just simulators. not just whispers. We've got live ships showing the signature again. I'm seeing the same damn rhythm in Guam telemetry. Sarah's pulse hammered. It's inside the fleet. Not a shadow, not an echo. Active. Yes, he said. And if they've embedded it this deeply, they're not just listening anymore. They're steering. She felt the floor tilt under her. The thought chilled her more than reactor alarms ever had. If hostile systems weren't just monitoring but manipulating reactor behavior, then every submarine was a hostage waiting to drown. Days later, she left Annapolis under the pretense of a faculty conference. In truth, she met Marcus in a diner off Route 50. The kind of place where old men nursed coffee all day, and no one looked too closely at strangers. He looked older than she remembered. Haunted. His eyes had the same exhaustion hers carried. The kind you couldn't wash away with sleep. He slid a flash drive across the table. Data from Guam. From a Los Angeles class that nearly lost containment last week. They kept it quiet. Official story says a pump malfunction. But look closer. She plugged it into her laptop, hands trembling. As she pulled up the files, the pattern screamed at her in familiar waves. The beacon was alive inside another sub. The conspiracy had bled into the bloodstream of the Navy. Sarah's voice was quiet. This isn't remnants. This is resurgence. Someone's rebuilding. Deep strike from the inside out. Marcus leaned close, lowering his voice until it was almost a whisper. And it's not just us. I intercepted chatter from allied navies, Australia, Japan, even Britain. Same patterns showing up. Same anomalies. It's global. Sarah closed her laptop. The hum of the diner around them suddenly unbearable. Silverware clinking, coffee pouring, life moving on as though the world wasn't standing on the edge of betrayal. We can't go through channels, she said. Not this time. Too many shadows in the chain. We'd just be feeding the fire. Marcus nodded grimly. So, what do we do? She stared out the diner window, rain streaking the glass, and then she said it aloud. We expose them ourselves, not quietly, not in closed rooms out in the open, where they can't bury it again. The next weeks blurred into secrecy and movement, late-night calls, encrypted messages, careful meetings in forgotten corners of Norfolk and Annapolis. Sarah pulled fragments of telemetry from cadet simulators, from leaked maintenance logs, from Marcus's stolen feeds. The pattern repeated again and again. Steady as a heartbeat, impossible to dismiss. The deeper they dug, the clearer the shape became. This wasn't sabotage for its own sake. It was a map, a network of listening posts, embedded codes, backdoors hidden inside the very software that powered allied submarines. A lattice of betrayal stretching across oceans, and then came the piece that turned suspicion into horror. Marcus found it first, an encrypted archive buried inside telemetry code. When Sarah decrypted it, her hands froze. Coordinates, not of submarines, of ports, coastal cities, civilian infrastructure. The beacons weren't just broadcasting submarine positions. They were building targeting profiles, turning entire fleets into surveillance tools for someone else's war. Sarah's throat tightened as she whispered the words. They're not just tracking us, they're mapping the world. The night she realized that, she couldn't sleep. She walked the quiet halls of the academy, past doors closed to cadets dreaming of bright futures, past classrooms lit only by the ghost glow of screens left on. She ended up on the riverfront, the seven black and endless. She thought of David, of Emma, of the Connecticut's crew, of every cadet in those classrooms who believed in the promise of the uniform, and she thought of the nameless men in tailored suits who had once sat across from her, sliding photographs. Across a polished table, the war wasn't over. It had only shifted, and she couldn't stand on the sidelines anymore. 2 weeks later, Marcus brought her news that made her blood run cold. They're planning a demonstration. He said, I don't know where, I don't know when. But the chatter's clear. One of our own boats is going to fail in the open, on camera, in a way no one can hide. Sarah's stomach turned. They'll let it spiral, let it look like American negligence, or worse, like deliberate provocation. Exactly, Marcus said. A staged disaster, and when it happens, every rival power will know we can't control our own fleet. The implications crashed into her like waves. Not just another submarine crew at risk, not just another reactor screaming toward failure, but trust itself shattered between allies, exploited by enemies. Sarah closed her eyes, the weight of inevitability pressing down. Then we have to stop it before it happens. Before another boat goes dark. Marcus looked at her, his expression heavy with the truth they both knew. That means going back into systems, into networks, into the places that nearly broke you last time. Sarah met his gaze. Her voice was quiet, but it didn't waver. Then that's where we'll go. Back in her classroom. Sarah taught with a sharper edge. She pushed her cadets harder, asked questions they weren't ready for, forced them to see flaws in the systems they trusted. Too easily, some bristled, some pushed back, but some, just a few, began to look at the data differently, began to notice the noise beneath the numbers, and though she never told them, those few gave her hope, because maybe this war wouldn't be hers alone forever. One evening, as the campus emptied into twilight, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Just one line. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Her chest tightened. The phrase she had whispered in solitude, now thrown back at her from the shadows. She stared at the screen, the weight of it heavy. It was a warning, or a promise, or both. Somewhere out there, the ghosts had heard her, and they were reminding her that the game was still being played. Sarah set the phone down slowly, her reflection caught in the dark glass. She was no longer a bystander, no longer a survivor. She was part of the fight again, and this time, she would not be silent. What happens when you realize the final battle was never about enemies at sea, but about who you become on land? The message haunted her. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. It followed her into her lectures, into her walks along the river, into every glance at the simulator logs where the faint sine waves still pulsed. Whoever had sent it knew her choices, knew her ghosts. And then the storm broke. Marcus called her from a secure line, his voice ragged, urgent. "It's happening, Commander." They picked their demonstration target, USS Nevada, an Ohio class running silent off Okinawa, reactor anomalies already showing. They're letting it spiral. Sarah's blood froze. The Nevada wasn't just a submarine. It was a symbol. Ballistic missiles on board. A deterrent that balanced power in the Pacific. If its systems failed in hostile waters, if its surface crippled and leaking, the world wouldn't just see a ship in crisis. They'd see an empire cracking. How long? She asked, her voice a whisper. Less than 12 hours, Marcus said. Telemetry already shows harmonic resonance. The beacon's embedded deep. If it hits cascade failure, it won't be hidden. Every satellite overhead will see it. Every news network will light it up. She gripped the desk until her knuckles widened. Then we don't have 12 hours. We move now. Getting in was the hardest part. The academy gave her access to training networks, but the Nevada systems were sealed under layers of clearance she no longer had. Marcus used favors, ghosts of old connections, a handful of technicians still, loyal to him from the Connecticut days. Together, they carved a tunnel into the live feed. When Sarah finally saw the Nevada's telemetry on her screen, her chest clenched. The resonance pulsed, steady, predatory. The beacon wasn't just alive, it was in control, Marcus, she said, her fingers already flying. They've tied shutdown protocols to the beacon array. If we cut it, the system interprets catastrophic failure. If we leave it, the reactor burns itself alive. Catch-22, he muttered. They built a trap that kills you no matter what you choose. Sarah's mind raced. Equations flashed in her memory. Old models, scribbled during long nights of research, half abandoned for being too unstable to test. Maybe, just maybe, they could be turned into a weapon against the beacon itself. Her voice steadied. I'm going to feed the array false data. Let it think. The reactor's cooling while we override in the background. Blind a predator long enough to kill it. Marcus hesitated. And if you're wrong? She looked at the screen, at the pulsing wave that had followed her from ship to ship, year to year, like a shadow refusing to let go. Then the Nevada dies, she said. And with it, maybe the world. For 6 hours they worked, their screens glowing in the dark, their voices hushed. The air heavy with the sense that one wrong keystroke could set the Pacific on fire. Sarah layered code like armor, feeding the beacon phantom numbers, temperatures falling, pressures easing, while in reality, she and Marcus stripped control. Back piece by piece, every minute. Alarms threatened to reveal the lie. Every minute. Sarah's pulse hammered like a drum in her ears. And then, with just under 3 hours left, something unexpected happened. Her screen flickered. A new window forced itself open. A live feed, and there he was. Hawthorne, older, grayer, but his cold blue eyes unchanged. Commander Chun, he said, his voice carrying across the years like a scar reopened. I wondered when you'd resurface. Sarah's throat tightened. But her voice was sharp. You should be in prison. He smiled faintly. Networks don't die in prison. They evolve. You of all people should know that. Her hands never stopped moving on the keys. You built this. You're planning to burn the Nevada as proof of American weakness. His expression didn't shift. Not weakness, vulnerability. A reminder to your leaders that control is an illusion. A reminder to the world that even the most powerful fleet can be bent to will. And the sailors on board? She demanded. The families who will bury them? His eyes were cold. Collateral, nothing more. Something in her broke at that. All the sleepless nights, all the ghosts of the Connecticut, all the faces of cadets who trusted her to teach them that their work meant more than politics or profit. Her voice was quiet, but it shook with fury. Not anymore. She cut the feed. The final minutes blurred into instinct. Fingers flying, Marcus shouting numbers, Sarah rewriting logic trees in real time. The beacon fought back, its phantom. Control loops kicking, twisting, trying to retake the core. But she had written the original models. She knew where to cut. Where to starve, where to blind, and then silence. The resonance stilled. The wave flattened. Telemetry confirmed it. Reactor stable. Temperatures falling. Containment intact. The Nevada was alive. Sarah exhaled so hard it hurt. Her hands trembled. Over the keyboard, sweat cold on her skin, they had won. For now, news never told the truth. Official statements spoke of technical anomalies swiftly resolved by fleet specialists. No mention of the beacon, no mention of sabotage, no mention of the war in the shadows. But Sarah didn't need headlines. She knew what had been stopped. And she knew it wasn't over. Days later, she stood again at the front of her classroom. The cadets watched her, pens poised, expecting equations, but she gave them something else. A system can lie to you, she told them. A machine can betray you. Even the numbers you trust most can be turned into weapons. She paused, letting the silence deepen. But the one thing they can't corrupt is choice. The moment where you decide whether to obey or resist, whether to stay silent or speak, whether to walk away or act. Some cadets shifted, uneasy. Others leaned forward, eyes fixed on her. She saw in their faces the same hunger she once carried. She capped her marker and set it down. Her voice softened. Someday, you'll face that moment. And when you do, remember this. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. The room was silent, but Sarah felt the silence breathe. That night, walking alone by the river, she thought of the Nevada's crew, of Marcus, still fighting in shadows, of David, alive and free because she had chosen to act, of Morrison, serving time for choices made under chains of fear, of Hawthorne, still out there somewhere, the ghost she hadn't killed, the network she hadn't fully burned. The war was not over. It might never be. But she was no longer afraid of that truth, because she had learned something deeper than survival, that the measure of a life isn't in victories or defeats. It isn't in the ships you save or the scars you carry. It's in the moments when you choose to act, even when the cost is unbearable. She stood at the water's edge, the reflection of stars trembling on the black surface. The night was silent, endless, full of shadows, and Sarah Chun whispered to herself the only words that still carried her forward. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts.